Hello, my name is Catherine Merseth, and I'm delighted to be able to come to you via this electronic medium to talk about leadership and schooling and the well-being of the children who are in your care and those who are in my care. We're facing a new normal because of the pandemic, and there have been many challenges for all of us, even before the pandemic. You with your fires, us with our various political fights and factions, and now overcoming these various challenges are an important part of your leadership in your school. So how are you feeling? We often start our emails saying, "How are you?" But we don't really wait to hear what the answer is. Or we meet a colleague in the hall and we say, "How are things?" What I want to urge us to think about is to listen to how individuals are coping and managing in this particular time. There you are in the middle. Children are talking to you, parents, community, government, teachers. We have fires and bushfires and difficulties in your region of the world. In our region of the world, we have challenges with, particularly here in Cambridge and in Boston, we are still on complete lockdown and not permitted to leave our houses except for very important activities. So what I want to talk about with you today are these 4 topics. One is checking in with your feelings and the feelings of others. How are people doing psychologically? Second, I want to talk about being an adaptive leader in these challenging times. And I know that a previous presenter, Dr. Armstrong, has spoken briefly about adaptive leadership. And I want to dig a little deeper into that concept and say, what does it really look like? Third, I want to talk about concrete actions, things that I would like to suggest that you can do now as a leader in your community, in your school, to enhance the learning of the children who are in your charge. And finally, and once again, I know an earlier speaker has mentioned this, the crucial importance of communication. So let's start first with checking in with your feelings and the feelings of others. We know from recent surveys that school leaders are very concerned about student well-being. And this is not a new concern, but I think it has been exacerbated by the COVID crisis, by the situation where individuals really don't fully understand the pandemic and they don't fully understand whether there will be a vaccine or how safe it will be to engage with others in our communities. They're also very worried about online teaching, or what we might call blended teaching, where some activities that normally had been accomplished in a classroom are now being accomplished online, such as this particular seminar. And then a third very important concern is one of finance, because we are facing, because of the pandemic, a worldwide recession, meaning there will be less money. And unfortunately, when there's less money, it seems there is less money, even more true for schooling and for education. So these are the challenges for school leaders today. Next, I'd like to talk about checking in with your feelings and with the feelings of others. And there are 3 things that I think are happening now psychologically. One is a sense of grief, a sense of loss, a sense of worry. A second is anxiety, and a third is stress. And so grief and anxiety put together really, I think, are a wonderful recipe for stress. And the question is, what can you do about it? It's real. We're not making up our feelings. They are things that we are actually encountering, feeling, maybe not able to sleep so well at night, maybe distracted, maybe becoming more short-tempered. And so the first step with thinking about stress and anxiety is to acknowledge it, to say, yes, I am feeling different. I am feeling somewhat worried. How does it affect you? Stop and think. Are you a person who becomes more agitated, or are you a person who becomes more depressed? But acknowledgement is always the very first important step. The next important step is to welcome your stress. Bring it in. We always, at least for myself, I always want to push the stress away. I'm not stressed. No, I don't want to think about stress, but I am. And so bring it in. Bring in that sense of, I'm anxious, I'm worried, I'm upset, I'm feeling stress. All these different pieces, as the picture showed, are pushing on you as a leader. And you need to stop the tape and acknowledge that it is coming to you and bring it in. The third step would be to really identify the source of the stress or the anxiety. And I think probably the easiest way to do that would be to say, complete a sentence. I am stressed about ... What are you stressed about? And when you complete that sentence, what we find is that you really are articulating what you deeply value, what you deeply care about. And so you may, as a school leader, say, I am very stressed about the learning of my learners in the 3rd grade. Well, that's something you really value, their learning. Or I am worried or anxious about the psychological well-being of my staff. Well, that tells me that you really see and value your staff as an important component of the work that you do. So in completing that sentence and acknowledging it and welcoming it in and putting it on paper or saying it publicly, I think is the beginning of a way of dealing with stress. Another element of stress is grief. And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is an author that has written about grief, and she talks about the different stages of grief. First, denying that really things have changed, then slowly moving through various stages toward acceptance and what you might call a new normal. And I think for many of us today, we are at some level grieving the way things used to be. I liked the way I taught in my classrooms at Harvard, and now I am required to teach in a new and a different way. And so as I'm saying this, I'm grieving for the old, and I'm fearful because I don't know how to do the new. So there's a sense of the fearfulness is what we call anticipatory grief. I'm anticipating that it won't be easy. I'm anticipating that it won't be as effective. I'm anticipating a grief. And really that's energy that is not well spent, because I don't know for sure that it will be harder or less effective or different or, in some ways not helpful. So this anticipatory grief is really, I think, a killer. And I think it's one that ends us in a position of feeling really helpless. And that's not a good place to be. So you may be thinking to yourself, oh, Dr. Merseth, you're just, pie in the sky. Just tell me to stop stressing and to de-stress, and it's not so easy. I know it's not so easy, but consider the alternative. The alternative is that if you don't acknowledge your stress, it's simply going to build up, build up, build up. And it will come out in one way or another that may not be particularly helpful to you or those around you. So acknowledge your changes, acknowledge your grief, acknowledge your anxiety, talk about it. When you see other staff members in the hall or you're talking with parents and you say, how are you? Really mean it and really wait to hear the answer and listen carefully and read the verbal the verbal cues and the physical cues that people say when they try to answer your question, how are you? Thank you.